Hello there, coming to you live from the capital Jakarta, Indonesia. You are watching the journal of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summits here in the capital. I'm Rahmat Idris.
And I'm Siska Becker. We are very excited to be back here on this majestic stage in the Bung Karno Auditorium in TVRI World to give you the highlights of day one of the ASEAN Summit and of course all the other related summits preceding it. And also we're going to give you a bit of updates about the arrivals of head of states and head of delegates who are still arriving now at the Soekarno-Hatta Cengkareng Airport.
That's right, Siska. All eyes are on the capital Jakarta today as we unfold the first day, day one of the 43rd ASEAN Summit, where we've noted some remarkable points delivered by the President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo. However, we're not going to be just the two of us here for the program today. In the journal, we have the honor to be joined by the expert on international politics and research professor at the National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN. A very warm welcome to Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Professor, thank you very much for joining us in the conversation. What an honor to meet you again.
Well, it's a pleasure, Mas Rahmat and Mbak Siska.
Yes, Prof. Dewi, really good to see you again. Last time we saw each other was at the G20.
This is a reunion.
This is a reunion for all of us. Very happy to have you.
We call that from one summit to another. We look forward to talking to you on so many issues on the tables at the summits in just a few minutes, Prof. In the meantime, Siska, let's just start our program today. This is The Journal.
The Myanmar crisis is our first report at the Journal today. Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal and Security Affairs said Myanmar issue may hamper implementation of ASEAN Political Security Community Council or ASCP Blueprint 2025.
In his latest remarks, Political Affairs Minister Mahfud MD said in Jakarta, ASEAN was challenged with not only global problem, but with Myanmar issue, which may hamper the implementation of ASCPC Blueprint 2025. Minister Mahfud MD said the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war should act as a warning system for ASEAN to resolve the Myanmar conflict. Minister Mahfud MD also urged ASEAN member countries to boost cooperation in the borderline and increase exchange of information on implementation of mandates adopted from Declaration on Combating Trafficking in Persons or TIP made in May this year.
And now the ASEAN way, right over left-hand side.
All right, let's just dive right into our conversations with Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Professor, for lack of a better word, this has been quite a challenging chairmanship for Indonesia throughout 2023 for ASEAN. How have you viewed, personally, in your perspective, our chairmanship this year, what has been achieved and what's still on the table to be discussed and probably carried over to the next chairmanship?
Well, as you know, ASEAN faces a lot of challenges. Within ASEAN itself, as we've been watching, the Myanmar issue is, an intractable challenge. It started in 2021 during the Brunei chairmanship, and then carried over to the Cambodian chairmanship. And there was a lot of expectations that when Indonesia takes over as chair of ASEAN, something significant could be achieved to resolve the conflicts. But frankly, this has been quite disappointing, and we can talk about this later, because not much movement in terms of the implementation of the five-point consensus. On the South China Sea issue, I think that there's been an ongoing talk to advance the code of conduct on the South China Sea. I've heard that they have agreed on a single text. That they will like to finalize this. Maybe the timeline is about 2 years, but we'll have to see, because in the meantime, we also know that China has suddenly issued a new map, which again asserts its claim on the entirety of the South China Sea, which frankly, I say that, this is not helpful, because the code of conduct clearly wants to emphasize, rule of law, particularly UNCLOS, the adherence to UNCLOS and so on. And then, the issues of geopolitics,
the rivalries.
The rivalries, the US-China rivalry and so on. So we'll have to see, there's a challenge for ASEAN internally, but also the external environment is also extremely challenging.
Right. One of the biggest criticism that ASEAN has received throughout the years is always about its slow bureaucracy, its slow decision-making, and its incapability of making strong decisions and taking sides when they need to. Do you think it'll be any different this time, especially regarding all those geopolitical tensions, as you mentioned before, Prof. Dewi, the South China Sea dispute? There are so many countries there involved, embroiled in this ongoing conflict. Will Indonesia, as chair of ASEAN in this last stretch of its chairmanship, can take a stronger stance?
Some of the criticisms towards ASEAN are valid. Some are probably trying to imbue ASEAN with qualities that was never intended. I think we have to make very clear from the beginning that ASEAN is basically still an association that does not have any supranational entity. This is not the European Union, where you have a central body, where you have a parliament that can legislate, where you have a judiciary, where it can make decisions and impose the decisions on member states. ASEAN has avoided this from the very beginning. So ASEAN does not have an ambition to be a regional entity. It is still very much, an association which pays attention to sovereignty and non-interference in each other's internal affairs. But as we know, within the ASEAN Charter, there's already an ambition, to bring ASEAN closer, short of becoming a supranational entity. And I think that while not wanting to make ASEAN too bureaucratic, if you're talking about bureaucracy, go to the EU. ASEAN doesn't have that kind of bureaucracy because most of the decision-making power is still with the national government. But there is clearly a need for ASEAN to be much more agile and responsive when it is faced with crisis. Now, within ASEAN, in the economic field, they've already devised a modified system of decision-making, namely ASEAN minus X. So not all countries need to agree, for example, on certain economic agreements. When certain countries are not yet ready to open up its market and so on, they can join later.
Excluded.
So there is a formula which might say, there's only minilaterals within ASEAN's multilateralism. But on the political and security issues, has been consensus where each ASEAN country has a veto. And this clearly is problematic when you need to make decision-making very quickly. But ASEAN, there's a very important precedent that they have been able to make a decision on Myanmar, excluding Myanmar's high-level participation. Clearly, Myanmar would veto that consensus, but the ASEAN 9 was able to do that. And from what we heard, that under the Indonesian chair, one of the priorities is how to strengthen first, the ASEAN capacity to deal with a lot of challenges. But secondly, the most important thing is also how to make decision-making less cumbersome, so that ASEAN can respond to crisis. So short of reforming, short of revising the charter, because revising the ASEAN Charter needs absolute consensus. So that will take. So that will take time. So I'm really looking forward to read the ASEAN Concord, how they will actually tackle the issue of, not doing with the ASEAN Charter, not revising the ASEAN Charter, but making it possible for ASEAN to be much more flexible. Now, from what I've seen of ASEAN progress, ASEAN usually does thrive on crisis. It is challenged. When there is a crisis, then ASEAN can reinvent itself, because it can grow from there.
Could you give us any examples, Prof. Dewi?
Well, I know ASEAN is my studies. My idea. I actually did,
for example.
I actually did my thesis on ASEAN.
Oh, great!
My PhD thesis was on Indonesian foreign policy in ASEAN. It's published as Indonesian ASEAN foreign policy and regional. ASEAN was established in '67. The first summit took place in '76. How long did that mean? It's 9 years.
9 years later.
9 years ASEAN didn't meet. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, only the foreign ministers. It was still just a foreign ministers club.
What was the root cause of that?
Because the most important thing for them in '67 was to end the confrontasi with Malaysia between Indonesia.
Malaysia.
To develop harmonious neighborly relations, so that each country can focus internally. So Indonesia was preoccupied with its own domestic development.
Yeah.
The focus is on political stability internally, economic development,
Yeah.
and ASEAN did not really offer much in terms of economic benefits, whether it's investment or trade or technology that Indonesia needed. So Indonesia focused more on Japan, on Europe, on the United States. All the other ASEAN countries were the same. So they needed ASEAN. As I said, I call ASEAN then as an Arisan club. You go to Arisan, not for the money that you exchange, but for the goodwill, for the trust building.
Okay.
It was only after the Vietnam War ended that the United States left Vietnam and the whole of Indochina became more or less communist.
Okay.
That they had the summit. And then ASEAN then agreed to deepen cooperation on economic area and so on. But nothing happened. Nothing happened not much progress between 76 and 1992. It was only after the end of the Cold War when China became a market economy, when a lot of former Soviet Union countries that breaking up the Soviet Union, the former East European countries became capitalist, and then the European Union became bigger,
a regional bloc,
but became a regional bloc and more protectionist. And then there's North American free trade arrangement. There's also a big bloc, and then ASEAN said, "Oh, if we continue to go different ways, we will not be competitive. We'll become less relevant." So they reinvented ASEAN. Right. So that's why I say, as long as it's true, there's no outright conflict. I believe that the challenge will energize ASEAN.
Right. Now ASEAN is 67. ASEAN is now we was established in '67. You mentioned, and now with the age of ASEAN right now, how much of it do you think it has evolved, and how much progress have we achieved in terms of coming together stronger and growing together in line with our theme as a bloc?
Well, we have grown, evolved. I said, ASEAN integration came about despite what ASEAN wanted. So it's incremental, but it's moving there. The word integration in the early days was anathema because ASEAN countries wanted to focus on national development, protecting its territorial integrity, protecting its sovereignty. It didn't want any supranational or regional body trying to whittle away, to take away some of this power.
Yes.
There was no ASEAN Secretariat then. And then they developed an ASEAN Secretariat, which is very weak. Just as, it wasn't a Secretary General then, just a secretary, and just like a post office. And now they have, the ASEAN Secretary General still doesn't have much power yet, but it has much more power than before. The resources are not there yet, but it's, they have more before. Then we had the ASEAN community. And we had the ASEAN Charter. That is the first charter. ASEAN was created in '67. The Piagam, the charter, only came about in 2007. That was agreed upon and ratified in 2008. So how long did it take?
Quite a bit.
Some 20 years. And the ASEAN community, the idea of bringing the people into it only came later. In the beginning, ASEAN was very much a foreign minister club. And it was, in fact, there's not a whole of government approach. The other ministries were not involved. It was just a foreign ministry. And now, when we are talking about ASEAN community, it's a whole of government and whole of people effort. At least, all the other line ministries, the ASEAN Political and Security Community, then you have the economic community, and then you have the social cultural community. So all of the other ministries are engaged, are supposed to be engaging in all the various activities. Whether they do that seriously, to what extent that they actually bring the entire government and the people into it, whether civil society is really involved, that remains a question. In fact, there's a complaint that the community means people-centered, people-oriented, but the people are not yet as engaged. So, but we have moved incrementally. It's not a big bang move, it's incremental move.
All right. Prof. Dewi, thank you so much for that history lesson. It's given us a more broader perspective. And we would love to talk more about ASEAN now in 2023.
Yeah, we believe that was moments of opening ceremony yesterday at the AMM for a ministers' meeting, just putting in the fine-tuning the details for today's summit, which is currently taking place. And I'd like to note out the things that you said at the beginning of our conversations, Professor Dewi, was the fact that we are facing three biggest homeworks in ASEAN Chairmanship under Indonesia this year. And I'd like to peel out each layers of the homework. First, let's go first with Myanmar, because we know that it started with the coup back in 2021, and then the 5-point consensus was produced under Brunei's chairmanship, and it started with the toppling of Aung San Suu Kyi, who is now in jail, and then the brutality and the human rights violations ensued. Up until now, it has become endless of some sorts. Can you shed some light on what exactly is happening in Myanmar at the moment, and how much of an ASEAN power can influence a change, can incite a change in the country?
I think a slight correction, if I may.
Yeah.
The ASEAN point, 2021, was, Brunei was chair of ASEAN,
Yeah. Okay.
but it was Indonesia that convened the extraordinary meeting on Myanmar in Jakarta.
Okay.
So the ASEAN Point Consensus was actually produced in Jakarta at the time. Yeah,
Was born here in the
it's
camp,
born here,
Jakarta.
and Indonesia is the one that took the initiative and invited the junta to come. But it was made very clear that the invitation to the junta leader was not a recognition, but the fact that they wanted ASEAN wanted the junta to accept. To be there, to accept the decision so that they could implement it. But as you know that the situation has not improved, violence has not stopped. In fact, there are more and more people have been killed. The leaders have not been released. They've released some political prisoners recently, but the top leaders have not been released. And the violence, you know, there are so many violence. It's not just about the NLD leaders, versus the military, but also, you know, the various states, they have been fighting for independence for a long time. And the Rohingya issue, as you know, is also there. That's not being settled.
Yeah.
So, but the Myanmar issue is very, very complex. And then it's not something that can be decided quickly by outsiders. At the end of the day, as Ibu Menlu, you know, Foreign Minister Retno said, you know, it really depends very much on the people in Myanmar themselves. They are the one who must sit down and sit together and talk together. And the key is clearly the military who seized power unconstitutionally. It has to be their willingness, you know, to behave according to law. They have signed the ASEAN Charter. The Myanmar government is a party to the ASEAN Charter. They've ratified it. And the ASEAN Charter talks about constitutional government, constitutional change of government. It talks about democracy.
Yeah.
It talks about human rights. And Myanmar is violating this.
Which is non-existent right now in Myanmar.
Ideally, you know, this is a bit of history again. Ideally, ASEAN should and take a firmer stance on Myanmar.
Okay.
In other organizations, for example, the Commonwealth,
yes.
you know, the UK-led Commonwealth government, when there was a coup in a member of the Commonwealth country, for example, like what happened in Fiji, they could suspend the membership.
Okay.
Unfortunately, within ASEAN, there is no clause in ASEAN that would enable ASEAN
to suspend
Myanmar.
Yeah, you know, when you're talking take a tougher stance, you know, usually the toughest stance, if you're an organization, is to blackball that country. Yeah,
to blackball.
Yeah, and that means, you know, someone if you belong to a club and you are blackballed, you know, you're kicked out or suspended.
Invited to participate.
At the moment, Myanmar is still part of ASEAN, is still invited at the technical level. You know, you know, as you see, the Foreign Minister of Myanmar is not invited, does not attend the ASEAN ministerial meeting because the leadership are not invited. So that is the most that ASEAN can do. But ideally, you know, later on when we can agree to a revision of the ASEAN Charter or an addendum to the ASEAN Charter, you need to have a stronger language about rules, regulations, and enforcement against non-compliance. Because a serious organization must have rules. If you are working for TVRI, if you break the rules, you can be given a warning letter. But if you get red card, you know, you can be kicked out, right?
But the umbrella above it is the non-interference policy,
Yes.
Professor. We'd like to get your take on that.
Yeah.
We'll have to take a short break now, Siska. It's been highly eye-opening for me personally.
Exactly. Very enlightening indeed. We'll be right back after this short break. Don't go anywhere. The Journal will be back.
Welcome back. You are still watching the Journal of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summit.
We now continue with the next item in our report, where ASEAN's Foreign Affairs Minister have agreed to submit ASEAN Concord 4 for approval during the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta this week. It is one of the outcomes of the ASEAN Coordinating Council, or ACC, meeting held on Monday.
The ASEAN Concord 4 is formulated by Indonesia, and it will provide guidelines to address future challenges in realizing ASEAN Community Vision 2045. Indonesian Foreign Affairs Minister Retno Marsudi said that in order to move forward and stay relevant, ASEAN must be brave to make decisions. Differences among members should not hinder ASEAN's progress. Therefore, during the 43rd ASEAN Summit, ASEAN would make some decisions that could strengthen ASEAN's capacity to face new challenges. At this meeting, ASEAN member states also expressed their appreciation for the performance of the high-level task force. They agreed to lend their support to the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 document. The ASEAN Community Vision 2045 is formulated by the High-Level Task Force led jointly by Indonesia and Malaysia. The vision is set to be ratified in 2025.
Di tengah situasi dunia yang sulit dan
In the meantime, on the sidelines of the ASEAN ministerial meetings on Monday in Jakarta, ASEAN signed an inter-secretariat memorandum of understanding with the Indian Ocean's Rim Associations and Pacific Islands Forum.
In the 50s and 60s years,
The MOU consists of agreements to strengthen inter-secretariat concrete cooperation, among others in connectivity and also in the fields of maritime. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi in her welcoming speech stated, cooperation is very significant in strengthening ties between ASEAN and countries in the Indian and Pacific Oceans.
Indian and Pacific Ocean countries are part and parcel of the Indo-Pacific region. We share the same backyard. Whatever happens in the region will affect us all together.
Minister Retno added, ASEAN and countries in the Indian and Pacific Ocean must work together in maintaining peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. Indo-Pacific must not become a stage for major power rivalries or potential hotspot for conflicts that occur in other regions, she added.
In the meantime, Serbia, Panama, and Kuwait signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, or TAC, with ASEAN on Monday on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting, or AMM.
On behalf of my ASEAN colleagues,
in her remarks, Minister of Foreign Affairs Retno Marsudi delivered welcome Foreign Minister of Serbia Ivica Dacic, Vice Foreign Minister of Panama Vladimir Franco, and Deputy Foreign Minister of Kuwait Sheikh Jarrah Jaber Al Ahmad Al Sabah following the signing of TAC.
ASEAN foreign ministers. Throughout the year, the TEC has been instrumental as collective norms and principle to forge friendly relation, habit of dialogue and existence in the region. Amidst the current global dynamics marked with rivalries and trust deficit, we must further solidify values of TEC to bolster trust and confidence. Now, with the increasing signing of the TECs, it reflects a growing positive enthusiasm. This modality must be utilized to further promote stability in the region and beyond. The TEC must unite ASEAN and its dialogue partner to forge practical cooperation in addressing common challenges, from climate change, food and energy security, to the proliferation of transnational organized crime.
In the 50s and 60s years.
With the three countries joining the signing of the treaty, ASEAN will have a total of 54 countries as parties to the TAC. Previously, at the 56th AMM in July in Jakarta, Saudi Arabia became the 51st country to sign the treaty. Minister Retno emphasized by fully applying values and principles of TAC, ASEAN can truly become the epicentrum of growth. TAC was established in 1976. It constitutes a pact that promotes adoption of the principle of non-aggression by ASEAN member countries and partner countries of the Southeast Asian bloc.
Right, those are some updates of the hard work that Ibu Retno Marsudi has been doing. Basically, for the past year, for the Indonesian chairmanship of ASEAN, it's been hardcore diplomacy work for Indonesia in resolving the myriad of issues that we're facing in the region.
Right, and let's go on ahead with our conversations. Professor Dewi here. Professor, we talked about all of these homeworks that ASEAN is facing, but also we do have a mechanisms to a dispute. So please shed a light on us. How do we go about solving matters internally within ASEAN that can be the guidelines to solving matters in the bloc?
Well, it depends what kind of disputes.
Okay.
Actually, when it comes to economics, we don't have any mechanism like the EU.
Okay.
So they will just have to negotiate it, yeah. Maybe at
so case by case
basis.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is that ASEAN does have a mechanism for settling disputes between member states, particularly when pertaining, for example, to territorial disputes or any major disputes between ASEAN. The ASEAN, according to the this is only in the Bali Concord 1, so the ASEAN Concord 1, and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. I've already talked about creating a high council where at the ministerial level. So, for example, if Indonesia and Singapore were to have disputes, we can call on ASEAN to come to mediate. Yeah. But now, how old is ASEAN now? It's 30 years. Already. More than 30 years already.
Probably we should be mature enough to have such a
understanding of how to
supporting system.
We are 67, so we are now
2023.
46 years. So it's mature
almost
enough.
Golden age.
Golden years. This High Council has never been invoked. So this ASEAN dispute settlement has never been invoked because ASEAN countries have preferred to go bilateral. So when Indonesia and Malaysia has problems over Sipadan Ligitan, for example, the two countries didn't go into ASEAN, but rather just leave it go. Both countries decided together to go to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and then so they trust each other enough. They have developed good relations already, so they don't want it to be an obstacle in their bilateral or multilateral relations with ASEAN. So they just leave it to IGC. So the high-level council within ASEAN is actually untested. Now the question comes, is there a mechanism for helping to resolve internal conflicts? No, there isn't.
In the case of Myanmar.
In the case of Myanmar, and there's no international mechanism for that.
They're not disputing with any other members.
So at the end of the day, under the UN Charter, non-interference in each other's internal affairs is not an ASEAN invention. It is not simply an ASEAN principle. It is the principle of international relations embedded in the UN Charter. respect for sovereignty, for territorial integrity, no interference in each other's international. They said it is the principle of international relations that made it possible for us to live in peace. But there are some gradations to that. There is also a new doctrine within international relations. It's called the doctrine of responsibility to protect. This is after a lot of gross human rights abuses took place, whether it was in Kosovo or whether it's in Myanmar or in other countries. The international community could not simply turn a blind eye to that. And countries could not hide behind their sovereignty to shield regimes that carry out human rights abuses. So the international community do have responsibility also. Now within ASEAN, we try, ASEAN tried to intervene in Myanmar during the early 2000s, during the Nagis, when the junta then refused to allow international assistance. ASEAN said, you need to allow international assistance, otherwise we'll leave you to the mercy of the doctrine to international doctrine. You can be forced to open up. But at the end of the day, it has to be at the behest of the country itself if it wants to call on other parties, so there is no mechanism.
Be forced on them.
No countries
to be assisted.
No, except when it comes to humanitarian issues, when that's the doctrine of responsibility to protect comes. For example, if a country, a regime, wants to starve parts of its country,
then we can act something.
Then we can act something,
But even our humanitarian aids and assistance into Myanmar has been met, I mentioned this earlier, have been met with resistance and attacks.
Exactly. That is, so in this case, you can see that even on humanitarian issues, that is one of the point in the 5 competencies is that access for humanitarian assistance. And AHA, the assistant from the ASEAN humanitarian assistance was attacked. So this really is something that is totally objectionable, cannot be accepted.
Prof. Dewi, one last question about the Myanmar crisis before we move on to other issues. There are so many other issues plaguing the region.
Just to delve on this one,
but
we believe.
Just one last question, because I want to get your perspective on what other experts have suggested as part of a solution to resolve the Myanmar crisis. Others have suggested economic sanctions, and other parties have also suggested a special envoy that can really focus on this issue and not to be dependent on a chairmanship that is always rotating and different every year. What do you think of this, Prof.
And adding to that, Professor, just to conclude, just to piggyback on what Siska has said, was that almost 3 years now, 5 points consensus put in place. However, there's been disregard, disrespect, and what else can we use just to show that there is no goodwill on behalf of the military junta to abide by it? Does it, in a way, say that, just leave us alone, we don't want to be a part of ASEAN, and just, keep us out of your conversation?
Well, there's a lot of tough questions here. Firstly, presuming that Myanmar still wishes to be part of ASEAN, and Myanmar has not, there is actually no withdrawal mechanism. Once you in ASEAN,
so I suppose you can exit.
But on the other hand, I suppose it is joining an organization, whether you want to join the UN, whether you are, it's a sovereign right of a country. So I suppose if it doesn't want to be part of it, it can. Nobody can force it to do that. But coming back on the presuming that Myanmar wishes to remain within ASEAN and wishes to be a respectable member of the international community, then it needs to be willing, to clean up its act. And ASEAN, to be much more effective, I've been saying that an ASEAN envoy has to have a longer duration. It cannot be rotational every year, changing, the personality, because even just at the technical level, it takes time for a person to really learn and to understand, to get to meet all the various stakeholders, and to learn to earn the trust of the multiple stakeholders.
And to learn the root of the problem.
If you keep changing the personality, he or she will need to relearn all the time. And on the other side, they only just got to know
all over again.
On all the other side too, they only got to know this person, and then it's only changed again. So even just at that very technical level.
Okay.
It really doesn't make sense, you know, to have this
All right.
rotating chair. I've been calling for ASEAN to have an ASEAN envoy.
Okay.
Maybe not just one person, have a serious ASEAN envoy office, maybe
Okay.
located with the ASEAN Secretariat, where maybe you have more than one person, you know, because
Okay.
there are various stakeholders. Maybe, you know, you can have one envoy who has a hotline to the civil society groups or to the political groups. You have somebody who can talk to the military. You know, this is, if there is an office there, and then they can pool their resources and do not work in contradiction to each other. At the moment, you know, Thailand has gone off to meet with Myanmar behind the back of ASEAN. The optic is not good for ASEAN because there is a sense of, you know, some countries going a different way.
Yeah, disunity.
Disunity within ASEAN, which actually does not help ASEAN's position. In terms of sanctions on Myanmar and so on, there's also problematic, you know, because sanctions always, the poorest of the poor, the vulnerable peoples are always the one most affected by sanctions.
The people.
So you know, you can say, you know, you sanction the whole country, but will the elite suffer or will the people suffer? So we have to be very careful about that as well. Now, don't forget that Myanmar for a long time carried out self-isolation. So it is not as engaged in the global value chain, the global supply chain. It's not as integrated into the global economy as,
and doesn't seem to
Indonesia.
Aspire to do that anytime soon.
But on the other hand, it is very dependent on China and on India. Now, both China and India are dialogue partners of ASEAN. Both of these countries are very important, have very important relations with ASEAN, and both of them say that they respect ASEAN centrality, but they carry on different policies which really do not support the ASEAN's position on 5-point consensus. At the rhetorical level, they say they support ASEAN, but then they continue to deal with junta, which does not make it that hard for junta to disregard ASEAN. So I think for this, you know, we also need to, ASEAN also needs to talk to the dialogue partners, that we all have to be on the same page to be effective. So if some ASEAN countries actually work against ASEAN consensus, and some of the important dialogue partners also work against the ASEAN 5-point consensus, it only perpetuates the problems. And I think, you know, that's one of the problems that ASEAN really needs also to persuade the dialogue partners.
Well, complex would be an understatement to address these Myanmar issues. Siska, apparently.
Yes, completely agree. So we have a lot more other issues to discuss with our guest, Prof. Dewi, but don't go anywhere. We'll take a short break and then we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Journal right here on TVRI World. We are still discussing matters relating to the 43rd ASEAN Summit with our guest, Prof. Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Prof. Dewi, I'm sure Rahmat here cannot wait actually to ask you about one question that's been the headline.
That's right. Burning questions in our heads, Professor, because some key notable absences here at the 43rd Summit of ASEAN here in Jakarta. President of US Joe Biden, Xi Jinping is absent, Vladimir Putin is also absent. What does it say, or rather not say, about our summit?
Well, firstly, Putin has not attended the East Asia Summit for a number of times. I think he attended once, but at the moment, you know, it is not safe for Putin to travel because there's an arrest warrant for him. But I think it would not be really politic for him to come. He didn't come to the G20, which saved everybody some uncomfortable presence. President Xi Jinping, as far as I can remember, President Xi Jinping in China, you know, does not send its president to the East Asia Summit. Usually it's a PM. Now, the question to President Biden, President Biden did turn up to the summit in Cambodia, but he's giving a miss to the ASEAN summit. Frankly, I'm a bit disappointed because we know very well that Indonesia bring forward the date of this ASEAN summit to September to bring it closer to the G20. Delhi, so that would make it possible for the leaders who were going to the G20 to come down.
Prime Minister Modi is here, assuming he'll travel together with Biden back to New Delhi after this.
And a number of leaders who attend the G20 summit will be coming here. And as I say, usually the ASEAN summit is held later in the year, October, November. And it would have given Indonesia more time, to prepare for the summit. But it is rushed, to bring it to September. I'm sure that we're doing. The Kemlu is able to do that, the government, but it was the expectation that President Biden would come. So personally, Ibu Reno probably will not say it. I'm actually very disappointed because this does not really align with the Washington's statement that ASEAN is the heart of its Indo-Pacific strategy. Now, I'm not saying that the Vice President is not important. Of course, the Vice President is important, and we are happy to see that the US is here at the high level. But during President Trump's administration, he missed all of that. But we do not want the US to be seen again to be neglecting ASEAN. But what I find a bit you might see this as a slight, you see. President Biden is going to Hanoi.
Right after G20.
Right after G20. So missing Jakarta as the chair of ASEAN, and Jakarta, Indonesia is the largest member of ASEAN, is seen as a natural leader in ASEAN, and whether we like it or not, Indonesia is seen to be playing a particular role in ASEAN, and to miss out Jakarta, and then going from the G20 to another
Vietnam.
Southeast Asian country. As I said, it doesn't look good for President Joe Biden.
It doesn't read well.
It doesn't, it doesn't read well.
It is definitely very perplexing to see that President Joe Biden would go to Vietnam, bypassing the ASEAN summit altogether to discuss something with Vietnam without the ASEAN community right there with him. Does this actually can be a reflective moment for ASEAN, Prof. Dewi?
I think it should be a reflective moment for the United States. Because the United States has been absent, and its stature within the region has gone down. It is faced with China that is coming up. The U.S. leadership within the Indo-Pacific is under great challenge from China, and the U.S. has been very concerned about China, bringing South Asian countries closer and closer under its orbit. And the way for the United States to change that clearly, to be much more visible, to be much more engaged, to be much more present. So, and I say, ASEAN continues to host all these countries. The United States is here. The Vice President is here. The Vice President of the United States. But I think it is just a pity that President Biden should miss this opportunity to be here, to be visible. When President Xi Jinping is not here, it would have been much better for Biden to be here.
Especially with the rivalry that is going on between the US and China.
In that one.
So there was a question, Indonesia getting very close to China. Well, if the US wants to change that optic, do come.
Solidify your commitments to the bloc.
Your commitment.
Another notable absence, Siska and also Professor, that the Thai Premier Srettha Thavisin is not here for the summit. And you mentioned briefly earlier that Thai has sort of went behind ASEAN's back to meet with Myanmar's military junta. Can that be one of the reasons he avoided the summit, or solely because he's newly elected as Prime Minister?
Well, I think it's because new. I'm not sure whether the cabinet is really, appointed yet. I don't think he's got his talking points yet. And he's very new, the new
he's still
PM.
Adjusting to his new office.
His background is not in the government, it's business. Clearly, it will take time for the government in Thailand, to be consolidated. So I fully understand, because he doesn't want to come without any background. If he had been in the previous government, had served a role, maybe it would be a more gentle learning curve for him. But suddenly, to be faced to come to an ASEAN meeting with its myriad of issues without being fully brief. I don't think it would be would be too nice for him. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now to go briefly back to President Joe Biden's absence. Of course, there are many summits relating to the ASEAN summit itself, where the U.S.-ASEAN relationship will be highlighted. How do you think VP Harris and the U.S. should approach the ASEAN summit so they can still have a somewhat warm relationship with ASEAN, and they can match their words of encouragement, their statement that ASEAN still is a key player in the Indo-Pacific region, and match it with their actions?
Well, the ball is in the U.S. court. Yes, there is. The fact of the matter is Indonesia is a coordinator for the ASEAN-US relations.
Yeah.
So I think that Indonesia probably does take it as a slight.
Yeah.
I don't think that at the official level they
Yes.
would say this, but I think that there would be a question mark raised towards the kind of importance that the US really places on ASEAN. I'm sure at the personal level, VP Kamala Harris is a very able individual,
seasoned politician.
She's a very senior, very experienced, and so on. So at the substantive level, I'm not sure that she's probably very up to it. But as I say, a vice president is not president. But I'm sure that they will deal with more substantive issues as well. ASEAN will want to know more about the implementation of the IPF. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That has been launched by the US recently, while President Biden was in Japan, and people are still waiting. How the implementation will be carried out, how it will actually support the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, and so on.
Right. Professor, another reason why we bring up the questions of these absences is the fact that for a long time now, the U.S. has come up with their U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies and their commitments towards ASEAN, meaning that they're also trying to dampen down China, that has been asserting their influence in the region as well with their Belt and Road initiatives, and we have our own ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, which is the very meeting that will take place in the second half of today's summit, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific meetings. So share with us your perspective on how we have to go about amidst all of these two great economies to strengthen our positions as in ASEAN centrality in the region.
During the Trump period, he really did not pay attention to ASEAN. There was no U.S. representative to ASEAN. Under Biden, there was a lot of expectations that this will be like President Obama again, where his pivot to Asia.
Somewhat making amends to the absence from previous
and to a certain extent, that promise has been met. There is now a U.S. permanent representative to ASEAN, and there's the statement that ASEAN is at the heart of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. The Quad, which is the main framework in which the U.S. now works with Australia, with India and Japan to as a minilateral to protect the interests, seen by many to be an attempt to constrain China, is also try to broaden up, not to be seen to be exclusionary, because ASEAN doesn't want to be pulled to one side or the other, because ASEAN wants to engage with all countries. Now, through the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, which was actually also initiated by Indonesia, starting in 2018, it was adopted by ASEAN 2019, and now there was four pillars of cooperation, namely maritime, connectivity, economic cooperation, and SDGs. For 4 years, nothing happened very much. So this was in 2019, now it's only 2023. So Indonesia is holding the inaugural ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, where a number of this cooperation will be fleshed out. First, in terms of modality, as we've just witnessed, that ASEAN has signed, the ASEAN Secretary General has signed an agreement with the Secretariat of the Indian Ocean Regional Association, so the IORA, and also with the Pacific Island Forum. So these are two sub-regional groupings, one in the Indian Ocean, in which Indonesia is also a member, and one in the Pacific Islands, to work together so that the Indo-Pacific will be seamless. And then they need to find out, ASEAN needs to come out, with this in this forum, in areas of cooperation which would enable the 3 sub-regional groupings also to cooperate together, and also to bring the different countries to support projects. Ideally, we would like to see China and India and other players cooperate on particular projects. So this is a part of the confidence building measures, as well as delivering concrete areas of cooperation, like on energy, on sustainable financing, on digital transformation, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
All right. So the ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook is actually quite comprehensive, Prof. Dewi, on addressing a lot of issues.
But it's really at the normative level. The stress is on inclusiveness, on openness, on transparency, on rule of law. So this is different, for example, from the U.S. Free and Open Indo-Pacific is seen by some as being more at aim against China, while the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific tries to bring everybody in.
I see.
So positive sum game, trust building, cooperation, and so on.
All right. Now to talk more about the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, one of the most contentious issues plaguing the Indo-Pacific area is, of course, the South China Sea dispute. I just want to get your perspective on this, Prof. Dewi. Would we see any progress made here on the ASEAN Summit, the progress of COC, maybe any stronger stance from all the countries involved against China, who's now making rules of its own, making its own map, and everything else that is going on right now is actually pointing directly to no consensus in terms of resolving the issue. But what's your take on it, Prof?
And with the new maps now?
Well, clearly that, you can produce unilateral map, but it has no legal standing. Indonesia can suddenly claim, Sriwijaya Majapahit used to own Madagascar, and we put it in the map. Nobody will take it seriously. So as Ibu Rano said, all territorial claims has to be based on UNCLOS. And I think all the claimants to the South China Sea, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei hasn't said anything. Vietnam, they've said, there has to be
China
based
is
on
one of the signatories of UNCLOS.
Singapore, not only signatory, it's ratified it.
Has ratified it,
the
but
US,
don't go by it.
The US was signatory of UNCLOS, but has not ratified it. But China has ratified it, but then it violates it. So the code of conduct, it's a dilemma. It's been going on for 20 years. It was 2002 that the need for first a declaration of conduct, and then and we talk about the need for a more binding code of conduct. But for me, the most important thing is now, I rather not have a code of conduct if that code of conduct were to give legitimacy to China's claim.
Could it though, Bu?
Well, that is, I think that is a negotiation into the scope, what would be, the basis, because clearly ASEAN must insist it's UNCLOS 82. It's inviolable. There should be no recognition.
Ironclad.
There's no recognition of unilateral claims based on traditional rights, 9-line and so on. If China were to bring that issue into the code of conduct, then it's better not to have that, because you do not want to legitimize. So I don't really know. I'm not privy yet to the content, but clearly they probably have still some disagreement about the scope, which areas does it cover, and also about, the principles. Because usually, menimbang, considering the international law, blah, blah, blah. So what would China want what would China want to bring into it? But the most important thing is that, whatever the basis of the claims, and for that country, for us, the non-negotiable, it only UNCLOS 82 is the basis for the claims. And secondly, that any conflicts, any disputes must be resolved peacefully, and that no threat or use of force. So the TAC should also be the guiding principle for any code of conduct.
So whatever COC they come up with, it has to be in respect of each and every country's stated within that in favor of
it has to be based on UNCLOS. It has to be based on UNCLOS.
However, it goes without saying, Professor, that a lot of the member states of ASEAN still have this sort of dependency on China, be on different levels, be it as strategic political partners, more importantly, economic partners, which bears to questions how much of these dependency will come into play as they decide
and how to deal with the issue.
To deal with the South China Sea as these overlapping borders, because in a way it weakens our efforts of diplomacy?
Well, I think that all countries want to trade with China. China is a very important economic partner. China is a strategic partner of ASEAN, and it's a comprehensive strategic partner of Indonesia and also of many other countries. And that goes without saying.
Okay.
And we want to continue to cooperate with China, and we want China to remain friendly towards the region.
Okay.
But there are also principles, yeah? And the rule of law is a principle that is inviolable.
Okay.
I mean, just because we have good cooperation with China on economy issue doesn't mean that we want to give up our North Natuna Sea exclusive economic zone. You know, Indonesia is quite firm on that. And the same goes for Vietnam and Thailand. I mean, not Thailand, it's not a claimant. Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Brunei. We do not want to be confrontational with China. It is not in anybody's interest to have conflicts. But on principles, we can disagree, we can agree to disagree.
Okay.
We can agree to disagree. I like that.
That's a very diplomatic way.
But we hope that China will agree with us. You know that the international law is the sole basis.
Okay.
Prof.
Dewi, one last question. I want to take us back to Indonesia's chairmanship of ASEAN, which is nearing to the end, and I want to take us back actually to a statement made by President Joko Widodo when he opened the 43rd ASEAN Summit earlier in the day. He described ASEAN as a family, as a big family. He mentioned, like in a family, people can have different opinions. Unity doesn't mean conformity. We can still live harmoniously, even with differences. And I want to ask you bluntly, are we a family or are we a dysfunctional family?
Most families are dysfunctional.
Most families are dysfunctional.
I mean, if you see a family that is so perfect, no disagreement, then you have to question mark.
Something is seriously wrong.
Serious families, there will be disagreement and so on. Okay. But even within a family, I come from West Sumatra, and there are very strict rules of adat, for example. And people are expected to follow that. And if you really violate, you can be exiled sepanjang adat. Diusir sepanjang adat.
Wow.
So if you really, so you cannot come into the family anymore, So there are certain things that you violate. For example, if there's incest, for example, or marriage within, a family.
Same family.
It is not. And I think Bali also has a very strict rule. Also, there are certain things that you have. You can come back after you pay certain fines. Now, here, your question is probably, Myanmar. Should we kick it out sepanjang adat? I said, well, I think that that's why, ASEAN needs to have a stronger mechanism for compliance, ensuring compliance. As we become more cohesive organizations, national interests and regional interests must go together. Clearly, ASEAN does not intervene. It's not allowed to intervene in domestic affairs. But if there are issues within a country that impacts very negatively to the region as a whole, then the region needs to be involved. They clearly take interest in it. And clearly, I do not want to see Myanmar being kicked out of ASEAN because Myanmar is very much part of Southeast Asia, part of the family. But let's hope that, they also feel that, they want to continue to be part of our family. Because if it feels that, I'm better off, I don't care about the big family anymore, and then the family say, okay, you can, we should
more than
go on your own way.
No longer be a part of our associations. And on the note of family, over in West Sumatra, we truly highly respect our mothers. But the question is, in ASEAN, who is our mother? All right, this has been a delight and, for lack of better words, illuminating conversation with you, Professor. I'd like to express our gratitude to expert on international politics and research professor at the National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Always a pleasure, Prof.
Thank you.
We hope to see you again for future occasions, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
Of course, always our pleasure. And unfortunately, that's the end of our program, Rahmat. We've shown you highlights of day one of the 43rd ASEAN Summit. But of course, the coverage on TV, our world continues after this, and we'll be back again tomorrow, right?
That's right. We're going to be coming live to you every single day until the 7th of September with every details of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summits here from the capital Jakarta, Indonesia. In the meantime, we bid you adieu. I'm Rahmat Idris.
I'm Siska Becker. See you back soon on TV RR World. Until then, take care and goodbye.
Bye-bye.